Welcome to the Christ in Private Practice podcast, where we empower Christian counselors and share stories of God's work in mental health. I'm your host, Camille McDaniel, licensed professional counselor. Let's dive in.
Welcome back to another episode. Today, I have the pleasure of talking to Dr. Melvin Varghese. I know that he's kind of more familiar in the way he talks with others, so Melvin is just fine with him. But Dr. Melvin Varghese is a licensed psychologist in Philadelphia, Pennsylvania. And in 2015, Dr. Varghese founded Selling the Couch, which I think a lot of my listeners may have heard before, but many of you may have not been familiar with it. It's an awesome resource. We'll get more into that later. But he has Selling the Couch podcast, which helps therapists move from clinical to online income. And on the podcast, he interviews successful practitioners about how they've built their practices. He interviews individuals on social media and marketing. He gets experts in the field in that area. And then he shares lessons as he uses clinical skills to create online business powered by podcasting and online courses. Now, his podcast is one of the top career podcasts in Apple Podcasts, and it has over 1.8 million downloads, which is phenomenal. And it's been heard in over 125 countries. Dr. Varghese has also founded several resources for therapists transitioning from the therapist chair to the online space, including a podcasting community for therapists. And it has supported over 240 therapists, probably even more at this time, who want to podcast. And he has online courses, mastermind courses for therapists who are trying to launch their online courses and learn more about podcasting, as well as individuals who might be veterans to content creation, but who are looking to scale their courses to new levels. So I am super excited that he was able to take time out of a very busy schedule to talk to us today about that very topic on podcasting for individuals who are Christian counselors. Thank you so much, Melvin, for taking the time.
Camille, first of all, we were talking right before. You said it's been 9 years since we recorded that podcast. It's like time flies.
Yes.
But I think, I don't know, it's just like the beauty of our field that we can still stay in touch and it feels like, oh yeah, we're just catching up
Right.
again. So grateful to be here.
Thank you so much, Melvin. Yeah, let's go ahead and dive in. I'm just going to start by asking you, I know that you are a clinician of faith, and if you could just kind of jump in and share with us like your faith journey, and then what inspired you into the field of like mental health, and then podcasting and course creation and all of those wonderful things.
First of all, it's such a good question because it's something that, like, my Christian faith is something I'm talking more about, but I think for the longest time I was so scared, I think, to talk about it, especially because like our mental health field generally tends to be more secular.
Yes.
And I feel like a lot of, even if whether you're a Christian counselor or you are a therapist that identifies as Christian, I think sometimes there's been this like, oh, is it okay if I share? If it's not, what kind of like pushback will I get? All of that, or
Yes.
even I think in this sort of climate that we're in, right? There's like this like impression of like what it means to be Christian, right?
Yes.
And this fear of like being put into a box. That kind of thing, right? So, I mean, to answer your question, I think when I got into the mental health field, because I was born in India, and my parents made a really hard choice to leave their family in the late 80s for to immigrate to the US. And what they talked a lot about was my brother and I have a younger brother, just for us to have better educational and career opportunities that they wouldn't be able to provide
Right.
if they were staying at home in India. And my parents are Christian. I think as far as I know, like 4 generations back are Christian. In fact, the church that my parents grew up in and that I grew up in is known as the Marthoma Church. So it's named after Saint Thomas, one of Christ's disciples, who actually about 20 years after the death of Christ ended up in South India and planted one of 7 churches. And the church that we went to was an offshoot of that church. And so there's like a rich history of like of faith and all of these things. And I feel like
Hmm.
even for my parents, right, like to leave a new
Yeah,
leave a country, it really is like a step of faith. Uh, and
definitely.
yeah, so I mean that was like a big part of it. And why I picked psychology, I think growing up, I there was uh, there was always this tension I felt of like, I struggle with both depression and anxiety, and for a long time I thought about like, is this like a lack of faith kind of issue?
Hmm.
And I really struggled with that piece of it when I, realized like these are independent of each other.
Right.
Um, and I also saw a lot of peers, particularly among like South Asian origin, who were navigating many of these kind of like acculturation kind of stuff, right? Leaving a country, the pressure to perform, uh, you know,
Hmm.
uh, I like a lot of my peers said, they got very similar kind of things. Again, I don't think that my parents I think they genuinely meant well, but it was like, we
Right.
are leaving because like,
Right.
and so it's like this all this pressure to like make it, right,
Because
and be
all the
successful.
sacrifice, it's like
Yeah.
we
Yep.
are taking monumental steps.
Yeah.
You are going to take advantage of these monumental steps that we're taking.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Yeah,
I get it.
yeah, yeah, absolutely. And I mean, even I was thinking back to recently, I mean, my parents were like in their mid 30s when they
Wow.
decided to come, right? And I was like, that's like, career, like
Yes.
established all of that stuff and to leave. Um, and my mom was a nurse. My dad was an attorney in India, and neither one. So when my mom, she had to do all the licensing and the exams and all that stuff. My dad's law degree didn't even transfer over, so he
Wow.
worked.
I've
I
heard
mean,
that before.
yeah, yeah, it's like a whole
Goodness.
process. Yeah, and so I mean, his first 2 jobs were his first job was at in the warehouse in the back at our local Walmart, and then he worked basically at the county hospital, like changing out like soiled bed linens.
Oh,
And I just kept thinking like, I mean, I think it does come back to like faith, right? Like, what a extreme like just trust in God to be like
yes.
He's gonna provide.
Mm-hmm.
I went from this like really like very comfortable situation, family all around, to now working at Walmart and and
And that
all
is I mean, can you imagine what it takes
yeah.
to say, despite what I see all around me, because you're right,
Hmm.
I'm a lawyer, I'm a nurse, and now I'm
Yeah.
changing like soiled sheets. It's like, but
Yeah.
nope, I know there's greater here. I know there's
Yeah.
greater here, even though it may not always look like it. And that they're in their 30s doing that.
Yeah.
And I'm
Uh
really trying to put myself, I'm like really trying
yeah.
to immerse myself in what you're sharing.
Yeah.
And I'm like, I don't know if I would be that
Yeah.
I don't know if I'd be that courageous. I don't
Yeah.
know. Could I be? I'm not sure.
Yeah. No, I ask myself that all the time, I mean, have 2 young kids too, and then like you're saying like, okay, we're gonna bank on something working out. Um, yeah, it's really but I think again through the lens of faith, I think, there's that phrase like more is caught than taught. And I think
Hmm.
what I learned through my parents is like, I don't know, there's like man plans, right? But God
Yes.
has an ultimate bigger plan, and just seeing their just sort of leap of faith. There's like this side story which I don't think I've ever shared before. My mom shared with me where and I get like emotional like every time I share the story, so it just like hits up on that. But like uh my great grandfather, so my maternal great grandfather was a farmer, and he started with this like small house and this small plot of land, and then eventually like built this like, where he had like multiple people helping him, like lots of land, all this stuff. But during World War II, like that part of India was under like rations basically, right? So they would like have
Oh,
these like packages of
wow.
like
Okay.
dried whatever, right? Or
Yes.
flour. And it wasn't enough to feed like a lot of people. And my great grandfather ended up like feeding most of his village through and just gave out like the food.
Wow.
Um, and I think so much about that because like that's like the crux of faith for me,
Yes.
being able to say like my comfort is one part, but me being willing to sacrifice what is comfortable for me to
Hmm.
help you.
Yeah.
Um, I think it's a
Yeah.
beautiful thing, and I learned so much again about faith. Yeah, we can talk more about this. My partner and I, we even met on a mission trip to outside of New
Wow.
Orleans. We spent a week rebuilding a community center hit by Katrina.
Oh,
Um,
wow.
yeah, so like a lot of
It's
this
like
is informed.
generational in your family. That's kind of really
Yeah.
neat that you even, to hear that it really started in different ways. They're all doing big things. Like even when you talk about your great grandfather, like
Mm,
again, we're talking about things that are big, like people can't
mm,
eat.
mm,
And he's like, that's all right. We're going to work this out.
mm,
And sharing, talk about mom being a nurse. I mean, it like dad being a lawyer. It seems as though just generationally, you just
mhm.
have a group of people who are just gifted in the areas of lifting others up,
Yeah,
which is very interesting that
yeah.
then here you come and in your way, you're still doing the same thing that your
Mhm.
family has done in pretty big ways, generation after generation.
Yeah, I mean, thank you for saying that. I don't think I even like, sometimes I don't see like that sort of generational pattern. And I'm
Wow.
just so, yeah, I'm thankful that you like articulated that because I do think, you know, a lot of like, I don't have a business background, right? I never took a business or marketing class. And even selling the couch was literally an idea in the shower. And and it started with like two conversations, conversations with two of my friends at my friend Mike's house in or his the place he was renting in like Manioc, which is like this part of Philly.
Okay.
And yet at the same time I feel like the more recent questions I've been thinking a lot about is what is success, right? And what does success
Uh,
look for me as a business owner? And more importantly, what does success look for me like as a person of faith?
right.
Because I mean, we know this, right? Like through the lens
Yeah.
of faith, right? Like the stuff of this world will fade away, right? Trying to build our identity on status or money
Mm-hmm.
or all of these
Mm-hmm.
things, right? Like it just causes us to keep chasing after more.
Yeah.
Um,
Yeah.
and And then I think that the other thing we've been, just like my wife and I've been thinking a lot about is like, what does it look like if we say like this is our enough, and what do we do with what God has given us, right? And how do we
Right.
like really push and make an impact? A lot of this is also dictated. We have a 6-year-old daughter.
Mm.
She was born 2 months early, so that was another huge leap of faith of like the NICU experience. And there was a moment where we didn't know if she would like both my wife and her. It was like emergency C-section. Like their lives were definitely in danger for like a minute. And I remember like sitting in outside of that like surgical room because they wouldn't let me in because it was just too like high
Mm,
risk because of like the
okay.
emergency section, all that. So, but I remember just praying like, God, please provide like whatever your will is, like let it be done, please like, um, just give me like a heart to like, but he provided. And I think, having a daughter now, like we think a lot about not every daughter in this world gets to have the equal opportunity and privilege that she does.
Yeah.
right?
Yeah.
And
Right.
yeah, and so what does that look like? When I was in grad school, I mean, the side story on this is when I was in grad school, I got to spend about a month in Kamatipura, which is the red light district in Bombay, India. It's the largest red light district in the world. I worked with a Christian-based NGO, and they basically rescued women and kids, and usually girls, from the
Right.
commercial sex trade.
Wow.
And
Wow.
so the thing we've been thinking a lot about is like, like how do we just have our enough, and then how do we use our resources financially, time-wise, to, create a scholarship fund for these girls? How do we actually go and serve? How do we expose our daughter to this as well? So she understands like through the lens of faith and also her own privilege as well.
That's,
So,
and that's very interesting that that's something that you all have taken to. Although I've never been to India, I'm a documentary kind of nerd. So I
mm,
actually remember just talking with someone about a documentary I saw where they happened to be highlighting. I don't know where that red light district was, but
mm,
what I do remember was there were young ladies in India, and this was generational. So it was like moms, aunts, and
mm,
literally they were being, pulled from school because it was time for them to go to work,
yep,
and just how they kind of talked to them like it was nothing, kind of
yeah,
just so, I guess, neutralized by all of it
mm,
that they are like, hey, it's your turn to start making money in the house. Like, this is what we do. And
yeah,
so just how much of an impact that would even have on just generations to come by changing mindset, healing people, mind, body,
mhm,
spirit. Wow. That's really powerful when you talk about when we have our enough, what
mm,
we can do to help others. And and that kind of even, okay, so that does kind of take me to a question I wanted to ask you too about the podcasting, because still for us it's like, okay, how do we find our enough, but then after that, how are we going to be a light, just like
mhm,
you have been a light in so many ways, and generationally your family has been a light, has just kind of been very positive in the way that they reach out to people. There's a scripture that I was going to use in order to
mm,
ask this next question. So it comes from Matthew chapter 5, and it's verse 14 through 16. So I'll read it real quick.
mm,
It says, "You are the light of the world. A city
mm,
that is set on a hill cannot be hidden, nor do they light a lamp and put it under a basket, but on a lampstand, and it gives light to all who are in the house. So let your light shine before men, that they may see your good works and glorify your Father in heaven."
mhm,
And so as you and your wife and many others are thinking like, how can we be a light? How can we give? How can we shine?
mm.
How do you see maybe like other Christian counselors? How do you see them effectively fulfilling this mandate? Through podcasting, through courses, or, things like YouTube and such.
Yeah. Um, I think when I first started this journey, I focused like disproportionately on like followers and revenue. All right.
Okay.
And I think one of the things that I do feel like God is like refined in me is uh, I see it now like podcasting is more like it gives you a platform to share a bigger message, right? Like, and that I think just thinking about it in that way. And I don't know, Camille, if you've like struggled with this, but like for me, I've had this weird tension of seeing that, I'm gifted in certain ways, but then also wanting to be like really modest and humble about it,
Mm-hmm.
right? And not
Mm-hmm.
like kind of just holding
Mm-hmm.
back because I don't want to be like boastful or show like any all that stuff, right? A show off,
Yes.
whatever it is, right?
Uh-huh.
But I think like um I've been talking with like our church pastor about this recently about like is ambition like a bad thing?
Okay.
And I think one of the conclusions like we came to was it's like where's the ambition? Where's that light being shown, right? Like
Mm-hmm.
does our
Yeah.
ambition mean that we are glorified or does it mean that God is glorified, right?
Right.
Right?
Yeah.
So
Yeah. So
Um,
then we would definitely kind of, we would have to maybe step into being a light a little bit more.
yeah.
And yes, I have definitely. In solidarity with you, I have
Mhm.
definitely struggled with that. I mean, even the very nature of the podcast, like I'm always trying to encourage other people. Like,
Mm,
oh, this would be great if you did this.
mm,
Or I have all these ideas, this would be great. It goes right along with what you do here or there. I'm, oftentimes telling people. And on multiple occasions, the Lord has told me specifically, I am not actually talking to you
mm,
so that you can give this idea to somebody else. I am
yeah.
talking to you so that you can do it. And
Mm,
I've always wanted to do like great things. I mean, I want to do great things. And I want to do things that point people to the Lord. I just don't want the spotlight. Like,
mm,
so I,
yeah.
I, I
Yeah.
want to be the behind the scenes person to give
Yeah.
someone the idea so that they can go and do it. And
Yeah.
so I think, at this stage of my life, yes,
Yeah.
he's calling me more to do things just a bit more boldly instead of always trying to get other people to do it.
Yeah.
It kind of reminds me of the story of Moses and Aaron when God's calling Moses to do all these things, and he's like, "Yeah, but I need help. Yeah, but I don't know how to speak that well. Yeah, but
Mm,
could you just kind of bring Aaron with me?" And it's like the Lord is
yeah.
just like, "Oh my goodness." You know, so, so yes, I think that definitely I understand where you're coming from, and I'm
Mm,
hoping that by just sharing these podcast episodes, others um they feel bold enough if they've had things that they've been called to do or create, that they are not afraid, for many of the reasons that you talked about when we first started talking on this episode. Will other people be upset, or will they come for me, or will I be received well, and all of that. And so if we're walking, in God's light, I think that whatever He places in our heart to do, He will cover us to see it through. So,
yeah.
so in
Yeah.
some way, we
Yeah.
have to have just
Absolutely.
boldness and faith. Yeah.
Yeah. Absolutely. And I think the other nuance of this is, at least for me, I thought like these had to be like with podcasting. I thought it was like this big, like bold, like in your face kind of thing. And I think a lot of this is honestly just like simple steps, like releasing an episode week after week for many
Hmm.
years, and
Yeah.
letting that impact like compound versus
Yes.
like trying to go, like out of the gates so fast where you're releasing like 10 episodes and then you're burnt out like 2 months later.
Oh, that's good. Okay, can you tell us more about that? Because
Yeah.
that that is definitely a thing, you get so excited about it,
Yeah.
but we're not thinking about this as far as long term.
Yeah.
So, how can we be effective, in
Yeah.
actually creating a podcast that can last? I mean, my goodness, your podcast, how long has it been? Like 9 years going?
Yeah,
I mean,
it'll be year 10 next year. Yeah.
that's amazing. So, I
Yeah.
mean, you know, what are some things we need to consider so that we
Yeah.
have longevity instead of just like a fast start and then a quick burnout?
Yeah. Well, first of all, I'm thankful you were one of the early guests because I feel like every one of the guests that have come on the podcast, they're honestly the folks listening and the guests are what make has led to the success of the podcast, which I'm just so grateful for.
Uh,
So thank you for that.
thank you.
I think there's like a couple of real practical things. So one is look at your yearly calendar, right? And all of this will vary for all of us, right? Like again, we have a young child at home, so what I wanted to do was I just asked myself a question, okay, what does it look like to podcast but around our daughter's schedule, right? And
Hmm.
so what I've arrived at for me is I only release live episodes 6 months of the year. The other 6 months we run replay episodes. Um,
Okay.
we don't grow as fast, of course, as we release, but I'm designing what success looks like for me. right? And so
Okay. Yeah.
I would do that. So practically what this means is for me, it's like 2 months on, 1 month off. So January, February, we do live episodes. Then March, we run replays. April, May, we do live. And then June, July, August, I actually take the whole summer off. We run replays on those. And then September, October, we do live. And then November, December, I take off as well because I'm like, it's too much with the holidays and like all these like, we already have like two field trips, fall field trips, which I'm excited for. But it's like one falls on a Tuesday, and I'm like,
Yes.
it's just too hard. So,
Okay.
um,
Th-
so I would
That's
just do that.
good.
Yeah,
Okay. And then how do we build up? Like
yeah,
you're talking about replays, or like I
yeah,
know here for
yeah,
our podcast, we record it ahead of time. And so
yeah,
like how do you actually build that loyal audience
yeah,
that you will be, sharing these replays with, or
yeah,
like yours, sharing these re-recordings, or I guess, however you do it. What do we
yeah.
do with regards to getting that audience?
Yeah, so I think the reality is, I think in the early stages, you have to quote unquote like hustle a little bit more than you probably need to in later stages, right?
Okay.
Because the systems are not set up. So practically what this means is, let's say that you schedule out like your ideal schedule and you're like, hey, I'm gonna release on this sort of cadence. The reality is in the first like year or two, you may have to do a little more just to create that backlog of episodes because
Hmm.
you don't want to be like release like 4 episodes and then be like, I'm taking next month off and then we're gonna run replays and it's like the same 4 episodes
Yes.
running on replay, right? Whereas you may have to that first year or two, I think is just the reality is just awkward and a little bit harder,
Okay. Okay.
because you could just got to get a backlog. But I
Okay.
think if you can sort of say like, hey, I'm thinking about this, like one of my most favorite phrases is decades over days. And I think if you sort of just embrace that mindset, I think that can really help. Um, and then also just realize like success looks different for Camille than looks different for Melvin than if you're listening, it looks different for you. You can always be inspired by other people, but just ultimately figure out what makes the most sense for you, you know? Um,
Okay. That's great.
yeah. And then I think to like more tactical to answer that question, the one, so there was a study done in last year that found basically out of all online media personalities, podcasters are the most trusted, and then YouTubers are
Mm.
the second most trusted.
Okay.
And so what's interesting, but the one issue with podcasts still is that they're not great for like being found. I mean, people will, like pull up Apple Podcasts, they might find
Yes.
like, or they tell, but like it's not as easy as like, I don't know, like if you're on YouTube or something, right? And they search your name
Right.
and or YouTube naturally pushes it to different people, all that kind of stuff, right? Um, so the piece that I see a lot of therapists that start podcasts where they don't often consider is they don't do the greatest of marketing those episodes. So they create the episode, but then they go to the next episode without actually like promoting it. And
Ah.
yeah, so I would say like two little practical things. One is build an email list of so that people that are listening to your podcast, you're getting their emails, right?
Okay.
Because don't build it like, don't just think, okay, I'm going to get all my folks and take them to a Facebook group or connect with them on connect with them on LinkedIn, because you don't want to be at the mercy of an algorithm that constantly changes, right?
Oh gosh,
And
that makes sense. And oh goodness, those algorithms do change a lot.
yeah, oh, a lot. I mean, we made a really hard decision over the summer to shut down our Facebook group. And part of that was just like and you remember like we started that in 2015.
Yes,
It was
I'm in
just
that
like
group.
yeah, yeah, it was, I mean, it was just, and it had grown to like a shade under 10,000.
Yes.
And it was a big group, but one thing I noticed is like the algorithm, I mean, like only, I don't know, a couple of hundred of those 10,000 were seeing posts, especially if we ever put links in them. And
Okay.
it reminded me again of like, take your most loyal listeners to an email list, because at least you can email them and you control that communication.
Right.
So that's like one thing I would
Okay.
say. And then the second thing is, figure out um, podcasts are great again because of, I call them like it's a great relationship deepening channel, right? So usually I have the same thing. I'm sure you do. Like you have your favorite podcasters, right? And once you
Hmm.
listen to them for a while, you trust them, you trust their recommendations, you probably
Right.
bought something they recommended, all of that stuff, right? But podcasts again are not great for like getting found. So think about like the one platform that you want to focus on that is called a quote unquote a discovery platform, i.e., like it can get pulled up in search, right? And so what we do is LinkedIn. And so we promote our podcast episodes on our email list, which is our most loyal fans, and then to our LinkedIn followers. And then I just kind of rinse and repeat it
Nice.
episode after episode. So
Okay, that's awesome. Okay, great. And then so that's like promoting, and then when you're actually kind of getting started with
mhm.
doing your podcasting, I've heard you talk about, and I was saying I heard you talk about it in the 7-day course creator
Mhm.
starter kit that
Yeah.
I jumped in and was like, oh, let me see what this is about, and did all the 7 days. And I'm like, this is really good for free. Like, you're giving a lot of meat. So I'm like, okay, to go to the next level, I couldn't even imagine how much more you're giving. But, in that, you were kind of talking about storytelling.
Mhm.
And so, when you're talking about creating a podcast, and I understand that different podcasts have obviously different focus. And so, but what did you mean? How do we incorporate this storytelling when we're talking about building our podcast?
Yeah, it's a great. I feel like all of us are one of the best skills that you can acquire is to be a is to get to be a better storyteller, right? And the good thing is, we as clinicians, we hear stories in the room. I imagine most of us are naturally like pretty good storytellers. It's just like a skill that needs to be refined, right?
Mm-hmm.
Um, So there's some practical stuff that I do. So this is gonna sound really dumb, but I'll just share.
Okay.
Uh,
Okay.
I have a Slack channel that's a private Slack channel only to myself, and
Okay.
I have a chat like a sub channel within the channel that's like stories. So when I'm like on a hike, like I try to do a daily hike, and when I'm on my hike, I hear something or I'm talking to a friend, something inspires me, I go into that Slack channel and I'll write like a little thing or I'll record a audio to myself so that
Okay.
I remember that story, right? And
Yes.
then when I'm ready to record a podcast, I'll look at that section and be like, what kind of episodes can we create around that?
Oh,
You
nice.
know? So it's almost like you're getting uh, almost like a way that you can capture ideas, and then you're
Yes.
synthesizing that ideas into the actual episode.
Oh, that's a great idea. And I'll tell you why, because like you said, we as therapists, we hear stories. I'm sure we can share stories. I mean, we literally are holding space and listening to people's life stories for a living, as we help them. But when it's time to actually develop your podcast episodes, then it's sometimes like you draw a blank. You're like, I
Yeah,
have all of
yeah,
this knowledge in there. How do I get it out? And
yeah.
I like how just doing it organically can help because, yeah, you're having a conversation and then it jogs your mind about something,
Mhm.
whether you've said something or the person you're talking to. And it leads to something that many people probably want to hear about or many people actually deal with. So doing it like in real time and kind of, no, that sounds like a great idea actually. And then just creating that note and the story that goes along with it can really help you create some really good content. Oh, thank
Yeah.
you. That's
Uh,
awesome. Okay.
no, you're so, and I like Slack because Slack has the ability you can take a picture, you can record a video, or you can record audio, and you can just put all of that into Slack.
Oh, I didn't
Uh,
know
s-
that.
yeah. So
Okay. Slack.
yes,
All right. So
yeah,
our audience is going to need to check that out because that sounds
yeah.
really like a neat one. I'm going to run over there. Okay, good. So then I think like the one thing I also want to know as people are creating is then what are some of the common mistakes that you notice new
Mhm.
podcasters and even individuals who want to do podcasting and YouTube at the same time? Like what are they doing? How
Yeah.
can they avoid? What are they doing wrong and how can they avoid this?
Yeah, it's a great question. I call this like all the mistakes that I've made. Please don't make the same ones. Uh, so the biggest one I see is they're relying on sponsors or YouTube ad revenue to monetize. And so they're
Okay.
banking on something like one day I'm gonna get a sponsor, or once I get to X amount of subscribers, YouTube will, like give me money. And I think another way to think about it is you can monetize your podcast from day one. So, for example, let's say you're a therapist in private practice. Think about like the niches, the specialties. Think about like even your 2 to 3 favorite clients. What were the themes that they came in for, right? And
Mm,
create solo episodes around that, right? Not of course sharing like private information, any of that, but
sure. Right.
common thing could be like, hey everyone, a common theme I'm seeing in the therapy room these days is blank. And I wanted to just create an episode and just talk through like 3 things that can be helpful as you think about this, right? So insert one, and what I like to do is I'll say like, this is the question we're going to explore. This is a story related to that question, which I'm usually pulling from Slack,
Yes.
right? Right. And then I do the 3 points, and then it's like a simple call to action. So the call to action could be, let's say it's around, I don't know, let's say one of your specialties is like uh, helping like fellow Christians who may be like uh, this intersection of faith and mental health, right? Let's
Yeah.
say,
Mm-hmm.
right? Like, am I a bad Christian because I struggle with depression, or is that a
Right.
lack of faith kind of thing, right? Let's say you create an episode around that. Then the call to action could be, if you are listening and if you're a person of faith that is struggles with depression, but also is like really having struggling with your faith, just wanted to let you know that's one of the areas that I focus on in my private practice. You can learn, I would
Mm,
love to work with you, at least touch base with you. You can learn more about my services over at, and then put in,
awesome.
link to website or whatever.
Yeah.
So, or mention the
Oh,
website.
that is
So,
awesome. I could, what came up in my mind as you're sharing that too was, oh, with the counseling compact, at least I know for
hmm,
like for counselors, I know psychologists already have that.
yeah,
Um, and I don't know if MFTs or LCSWs do, but I think that some of their councils are trying to work on it. But with
mm,
the counseling compact, your podcast can go all over,
yeah,
and we're here in the United States, and so even that tagline could actually get clients
yeah,
from
yep,
many different places where, you may be licensed. And in the meantime, though, definitely in
yep,
your own state. But
yeah,
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 that's a great call to action. That's cool. Okay. That's helpful. Um,
yeah. Well, I think the
so
other benefit of it is I was just going to say that, like, you know, the powerful thing about podcasts is people, and podcasts are also put on YouTube, is people can discover this weeks, months, years later, right? So this is something I think a lot about with content. Our two
mm,
main focuses are the audio podcast, YouTube, and then LinkedIn is kind of the third priority, right? But it's
right,
because like I really want to build assets on the audio podcast and YouTube that compound over time, right? People can find this five,
right.
6 years later. They can
Yes.
download our course kit, or, do a podcasting workshop or any of those kind of things. I don't want to be, I have a love hate with social media. I think most of us do, right? I don't want to spend my days on like hours
Right.
and hours on social media. I don't think it's good from a mental
Mm-mm.
health perspective or even the way that I want to live my life. So that's how I've kind of focused it.
Yeah, no, I like that because that's how I feel too. I wanna do things, but I don't want those things that we're doing, to shine a light to take over. And then I don't have as much time with kids or my husband or family or
Yeah.
friends and all of that. It's like, oh, I'm tied now to the social media and,
Yeah.
and all the updates. So it's that balance, right? And
Yeah.
that actually brings me to the next thing I was going to ask you about, actually, because when we're talking about balance and not being caught up in the whirlwind of, social media tied to it, um,
Mm.
and also not wanting to get caught up in, did I get any likes? Did I get any shares? Like, you find yourself going back to it and so focused on it that it really starts stealing time away from you. You don't even realize how much time has gone on. And so for you, who, I mean, obviously at over 1 million downloads now, how do you stay grounded? How do you not get caught up in, all of the fanfare about like, did people see it? Did people watch it? Did people download it? How do we just keep ourselves balanced? And I know that sounds silly because it's like, okay, we're mental health professionals. Clearly, we don't need to think about that, but we're human. And so when we put out things, we want people to take notice. We want people to listen. We want to know if anyone's sharing or liking, but there has to be some balance in it. So, how do you stay grounded
Yeah.
after doing this for almost a decade?
Yeah, it's not easy. Like I don't think I have it like fully figured out. I mean, I remember the first several years of podcasts, like I would obsessively check our download numbers on our like podcast host. And I noticed, I mean, again, I noticed like my self-esteem and by extension my self-worth was getting a lot like tied in these like ups and downs.
Yeah.
And then abstractly, right? Like again, through the lens of faith, I know that my identity is in Christ, but why is my identity now getting into like based on downloads, right?
Hmm.
But uh oh, again, this is I feel like it's still an evolving process, but over the past couple of years, I've done some really practical things to not get tied up in this. So one is I wrote I wrote like almost like a checklist of like what success looks like for me, but I did it in the domains, like I broke it into domains, right? Like so
Oh,
family, health, faith,
yes.
are kind of the three main ones. And that's often what and I kind of forced myself. I said, what are the three most important ones in those three domains? So
Mm,
that's kind of my like grounding, uh
right.
things, right? So for me, I know like being able to spend time, like have quality like dinners together as a family, like as often as possible, right? Like that's success, right? Now the other option, so I know when I read that, like the option then is not to be go check LinkedIn and make sure I commented everywhere while we're supposed to be having dinner, right?
Right.
Um, yeah, so that's one thing. The other thing I did is I've created like almost like an informal board of like friends and advisors and mentors
Okay. Yes.
from mental health, outside of mental health, uh different ages, different like just varying like
Mhm.
multicultural identities. Um I think that's been really helpful just to get like a different perspective on things. Um
Okay. Yes.
and I think that's the side note of the podcast is you get to connect with some amazing people who become friends, right? And you get to have this like group, right, over time. And then the other stuff is I don't have social media on my phone. Like I
Oh,
just took it off. So when I'm logged in on LinkedIn, it's on my desktop. I set a
okay.
30-minute time in the morning. Sometimes if I have extra time, it might be another 15 minutes in the afternoon. But other than that, like I'm going about my day, I don't have notifications on. I did that for a while and I noticed like again my like self-esteem was getting really impacted by like people
Mm,
commenting and liking and
yes.
um and these
Okay. That's good.
notifications every like it's like
Right.
bam bam
Because it's like,
bam and
oh,
I'm like, oh
did anyone see
yep,
it? Did
yep,
anyone comment?
yep,
And then the
yep,
pull to comment back and all of that.
yep, yep,
So I'm hearing a lot of then, first of all, faith, because if you feel you're led to really do this and put this out there, then you really have to do the thing that you've been called to do and let it go. We can't just keep on going back to babysit it. So it's like that's where you kind of, said what's most important. You had those boundaries to just keep yourself centered and grounded on that. And then I love that you also had like advisors. So it's like, the counsel, wise counsel, just kind of keeps you in line. And then, after that, set a time frame. You don't have to have everything attached to your phone, and you don't have to go into it and have no barriers around it or boundaries around it. So for you, like you said, I have 30 minutes I set, do it in the morning. I have to be intentional, so I have to go to my laptop or my desktop to do it. And then after that, I'm done. Like, it's going to be what it's going to be. Like the Lord will take
yep,
the rest of it over. I'm going to go live my life. And, when it's time for me to come back and check it, I will.
yeah. um I think especially all of us, but I think especially as like people of faith, I think one of the things that we really have to be aware of is social media, the pull of social media and this pull of these algorithms is it makes you perceive yourself as like super important, you
Yeah.
know? And like our identity then becomes on our like how people are perceiving us. And
Yeah.
I think that's just like something I'm like keenly aware of.
Okay.
You know,
Yes.
and like in weird ways, like it's like in juxtaposition to like what Christ says, right? Our identity is in him, right?
Yeah.
And not in like the number of likes or followers or whatever, you know?
Right.
Yeah.
Right.
So,
I have
um,
literally said that to myself. I'm like, you know
mm,
what? With, Christ in Private Practice podcast, I'm like,
mm,
Lord, I will be thankful for whoever needs to hear this.
yeah,
If that's 5, if that's 50,
yeah,
whatever it is that you allow, I will be thankful. Like I have to try to, just make sure I stay grounded in that, because you never know if it's 1 or 5 people who hear it only, that actually doesn't tell you anything about the impact. And so,
yeah,
obviously the more people who hear it, but that one person might blast it out to
yeah,
5 people or
yeah,
50 people or a million
yeah,
people, who knows, right?
yeah,
So we have to just be careful about that we don't allow our identity to slip into that external validation. Yeah.
yeah.
Okay.
That's so beautifully
Okay.
said. I mean, yeah, I think the piece also is the trick of social media is also we like devalue the person, right? Because we
Mm,
focus on the
yeah.
followers, right? So like as if you have a podcast, for example, right? And let's say only 3 people listen, like 3 people took time out of their day to listen, right? And I
Right.
think this is, again, I don't think I have this all figured out at all. But like the real pull is like, why am I not getting more numbers? Right. But we're
Mm,
devaluing the person who took the time to listen, for
right.
the sake of a
Right.
number.
Right. I think, okay, so then in my mind, okay, I see that as a balance, like keeping myself grounded
Yeah.
and not getting overly, focused and, on just the numbers, but
Yeah.
then also recognizing if the numbers aren't climbing, are you
Yeah.
doing all that you can?
Yeah.
So, and
Yep.
then that goes back to a lot of good nuggets you shared with us earlier, just to say, like, that initial year or first year or two, you are going to have to, like, do some work to kind of get
Yeah.
it out there. And so, yeah, it shouldn't be, honestly, if you are doing the work to spread the word and share and cultivate information that people really do need to hear, you really won't get just 3 people,
Yeah. Yeah.
but, but to but to keep yourself like humble, then
Yeah.
it's like, okay, wait a minute, I'll be thankful for whatever the Lord allows. But at the same time, if I am putting in the work and working the steps, I will see the results of that. You'll see the fruits of your labor. Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. Absolutely. I mean, there's a great phrase, get going, then get good, then get smart, right?
Ah,
That I try to think a lot about.
okay.
And I think like a lot of us, I mean, especially because I feel like a lot of us as clinicians, we're like recovering perfectionists or overachievers, right? And we want to get good before we get going. And
Yes.
so trying like putting ourselves out there imperfect just feels so
Yeah.
terrifying.
I
So
like that. Oh, and as you say that, okay, so then for anyone listening who can identify with this, one of the things that I recognize, even though it does keep me humble, like just to say, if all I have is 3 people, then I'm thankful. But the other thing that I did recognize about myself in saying that is that being thankful for whatever number does stop me from having to
mm,
push into the spotlight, which is what I don't always like to do anyway. So
mm,
then I possibly won't check to see, are you actually taking all the steps that you need to change? Okay. So, yeah, that was good. Okay. Thank you. I caught that one. All right.
yeah. It's a work
All
in
right.
progress. So
Well, can you please tell us? I know I would keep you here so much longer because I could definitely talk to you much longer, but I know that we have to go. Um, you have a number of different services, courses, that are out there, can you please share whatever it is that you would like for us to know so that we can find you, so that we can, take advantage of all that you have to offer?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, so yeah, again, my journey's been 9 years, right? Building out a lot of different things. The areas that I feel like I'm, decent at is podcasting and courses specifically for therapists. So therapists that want to start a course or a podcast, we have two free things. I think that's like the best way. So first one is what Camille alluded to. We have this 7-day free email course to validate your course idea, because I think that's like a area where a lot of clinicians get stuck of like, is this a good course idea? So we gave, all of the exercises away in our like main mastermind. We put this into a course that's over at coursecreatorstarterkit.com. And then with podcasting, if you're interested in starting a podcast, we have this free podcasting workshop. It's about 90 minutes. You can watch it on your schedule. So on a day and time that works for you, that's over at sellingthecouch.com/podcasting work.
Awesome. And we will, as always, put all of the information that was just listed on Christ in Private Practice. So, if you're listening to this on the go and you're like, oh, what was that? Don't worry. Go over to Christ in Private Practice and christinprivatepractice.com. And then you will be able to see Dr. Melvin's episode and all of the different links that were given that he has to offer. And there's a lot of good information on those links that he just gave. So please definitely go on over there. It is definitely worth taking the time. Again, thank you so much for stopping, for talking with me, for answering these questions and helping us to prayerfully shine our light through podcasting, through YouTube, through course creation, to continue to help others in the world.
You're so welcome, Camille. And what a privilege to be able to do this and also like talk about this through the lens of faith. I think my big takeaway is always just remember that God gave you all different gifts, and just remember that you can use that gift to shine and serve others, but just always remember where the focus should still be, right? Which is still on Christ, right? So
Absolutely. Thank you.
thank you.